recording because sometimes people forget.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was if that also like explicitly applied to the after talks, after party kind of thing that we have here. But yeah, either way, I figure it's good to just ask. But sounds good. I just started recording, and for everybody who is watching or listening sometime in the future, hello everybody. Welcome to the fractally after party, and we have a great discussion here. Thanks everybody for being here.
Yep.
Um,
Douglas?
yes, thank you so much. I wanted to follow up on Doug Wu, one of my favorite Dougs in the world. The force of Dougs is strong. And yeah, so I'm also sort of, I have a lot of programming experience, especially with PHP, MySQL, JavaScript, and jQuery particularly. But going to CPP is different just because the language is so different, as well as there's all these conventions. My experience in learning C++ to specifically develop for EOSIO is that a lot of the published materials are either outdated or adopting different coding conventions. For instance, whether you use the word using or whether you use type def when you're declaring your multi-index, how you're using like enums. They use enums in a lot of these things, and enums are different in C++ than they are in other things. And there's a lot of other sort of like specific examples using the macros and things like that. So I would definitely benefit from being in that group, as well as I would be willing to share my experience. I'm building our contracts in public. If somebody who has more experience wants to come in and sort of send us in a new direction, because I find that I develop the structures, but then there's all these like sort of errors, and the errors are just because I'm such a novice in this area. So yeah, I think it's great that more people are learning C++, and I definitely want to be involved in that group, and just wanted to follow up to Doug.
Yeah, I think Doug was talking about more Solidity EVM programming, but
Yeah.
in this particular case, the documentation is a big part of what we're doing. We're actually attempting to do a design by documentation where we write the documentation and then try to make the code conform to what we want the documentation to look like, rather than having the documentation conform to whatever we happen to implement, which I think will provide a better experience for developers. And that's actually part of what's holding things up, is we don't want to release things too soon and have the changing standards problem, and tutorials that worked 6 months ago don't work now. Although I think there will still be a little bit of that going on as we evolve. But that said, a lot of the principles of multi-index containers and smart contracts are very similar to EOS, but different. But yeah, a lot of it's being able to support Rust and eventually assembly script will enable people that are familiar with more languages to participate in the development of the contracts. Like I said, on previous weeks, we've eliminated some of the things like scope that you have in EOS, and we've added the synchronous calls, so you can call one contract and get a return value from it immediately, which is much easier to use than the inline actions, which don't exist in the new code base. So it works more like EVM in that sense. I think that was the biggest complaint about EOSIO, was we didn't have synchronous calls. And so that was one of the things that we were planning to add to EOSIO. But yeah.
Someone unmute Dan's microphone. I'm
Singular?
just kidding.
Oh, you mean?
Yeah, I meant you before you announce everything.
Yeah, no, I'm sticking to things that we've already said publicly that we were asking for EOS. So all the stuff we were asking for EOS are things that are going to be in the new chain. So that's, but there's obviously more than what I've said there to come. And of course, the devil's in the details. So we're saving the most exciting things for later. Jay.
Thanks, Dan. So one of my worldviews now is I think that the world's going to become tokenized, and I love the Fractally project. I'm very excited about a new chain. My question has to do, and then you also just mentioned, how do we keep an eye on adoption and how can we influence positive adoption rates? And my question is about token standards, not just token standards, but token standardization as a concept from a bird's eye view. One of my experience over the course of my life is a thing called vendor lock-in, where you get your token on an exchange and it's like, shucks, we can't deal with so-and-so's token because it doesn't fit within our scope of token attributes. And so I'm thinking in terms of, is there a community, what is it, the IETF or whatever engineering standards can identify a template that lists all the potential attributes of a token, puts it on and then circulates that in such a way that no matter how we invent and redesign and create a new token and put into place our own standards, but we cross-check it against the community, the standards-based community, where we have, with a vision towards, if we're going to have a tokenized world, can we have a standards-based token where we've all the engineers take a look at, here's a template of every potential attribute on a token, and the purpose of doing that is we're introducing this new token standard. Is it going to be friendly in a tokenized world? And I think there was a group that I saw, the IBM has promoted the Hyperledger system, and I think that those engineers have said, well, here's a token standard, and they proposed it as, let's literally create a standardization that's potentially adoptable by the entire global community to create tokens that fit within this framework of standards.
Well, standards come in layers, and layers that go between blockchains is one thing, within a blockchain is another. There's interface standards, there's one of the things that we're doing is we have one central token contract that everyone wants to issue their own token. They go through that, which means everything on our chain is going to conform, but it's still customizable with hooks for the manager. But the possibilities are numerous. I don't think you can enumerate all the possibilities. And then there's legal standards, and then there's technological standards. And I think the drive towards standardization is helpful on one hand, but also it hurts independence. The standards body starts to control things, and now how is that standards body going to be governed? I guess you need fractally. So that's a component of things. But one of the things we're doing is trying to standardize and make the tokens have greater conformity so that DeFi is more viable. Whereas EOS has a standard interface, but there's no enforcement that the tokens are actually adhering to all the different properties of that interface, which means it's more difficult to trust and integrate with unknown tokens. All right, Jorge?
Yeah, so whenever we are having our breakout sessions, we are grading the contributions of the person for that week. That's what I understand.
Not just that week. I'd like to clarify. What we're trying to do is rank the person who's contributed the most and received the least relative to their contribution in the past. That is the standard. Last week, if you're meeting every single week, then you can kind of see what they're doing this week, and if each week they've been fully compensated for the week before, then it's the most recent week. But if you've made a really big contribution, it might take years to fully recognize your contribution. For example, if you showed up tomorrow and gave $1 billion to this project, you'd be getting tokens for life. It's that kind of thing. It's you're looking at their total contribution, positive and negative, right? So someone might do something wonderful for us in one area, and then might be a PR nightmare for us in another, and maybe those two things cancel out. And then someone might have received a bunch of compensation in the past. In fact, they might have been overcompensated in the past. And so you might be undercompensating their present contributions in an attempt to balance out their overcompensation in the past. The way that can happen is someone thinks that a particular contribution is going to be valuable. For example, they create some new stable coin. And then 3 months into it, it turns out the stable coin gets hacked and destroys the reputation of the network. And now they're going to be ranking very low for a long time because their net contribution is much less than we anticipated it was worth at the time that they were being awarded. So it's entirely subjective, entirely flexible, but it's still tapping the wisdom of the crowds, because over time you're sampling everyone and integrating their opinion about how much respect everyone deserves.
Okay, so we are not grading the contribution, but the person, and not for the last week, but for the long-term contributions.
It's not about the person. It's about the person's contributions in the past, good and bad, relative to their compensation in the past. We're not saying that you're a good or a bad person.
The person's contributions, the person's accumulated contributions for up to the present moment.
Yes, we are specifically not valuing their future contributions because they may or may not happen. So the future is specifically barred from compensation.
Okay. Because I was thinking, and then I got it wrong. I thought it was the contributions for the last week, and in order to solve that, I was about to propose a macro event, like every month or every 6 months, in which more than a group of 6 people achieve consensus. The whole community voted for the highest contributions for the long term. I mean, in order to incentivize long-term contributions instead of short-term bits of.
Teams are the place where you have a larger group, got 12 people, and that you have the same 12 people valuing other team members over time, and people are valuing teams collectively. So teams kind of average out the noise within a group of people. A team will be more consistent than an individual, right? A team might have members come and go over time, but the team will be longer lived. And the team will be better known than the individual members of the team, because it's easier to keep track of teams because there's 1/12 as many of them. And so I suspect that over time, the teams will be a big part of a lot of people's compensation. And that's where longer term thinking can occur.
Great, thank you.
Matt.
Hi, Dan. So a question about process. So I was, so Rust and C++, those are, those show good judgment in Matt's opinion, great judgment. It's very credible, has a lot of respect. So listening to you talk about what you're willing to talk about right now about the platform software engineering process, it occurred to me that at your rollout, you're being very careful with it. I love that you're being that way. So because sort of credibility and respect and judgment, and these all go into our collective success, our individual success in this effort, it'd be nice to hear, maybe not today, or I'd love to hear it today, but what that process will look like. For example, tool chain selection, C++ 23, why you made the decisions you did, the build system, the unit test, frameworks and so forth. So
you were using C++ 20 and CMake. Those are the two big ones. Some of the other elements of the tool chain, front end stuff is, I think, React, but I can't speak as authoritatively on all the different elements there. But a lot of the tools are similar to the tools that I've used for ESIO in the past, bumping versions to more recent versions when we can. Eric?
You mentioned continuous consensus in the question before the meeting started. I just wonder if you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit. That's just stuck in my mind.
Well, that's sort of what we're doing every single week. We're reaching consensus, and it's a continuous evolving process. By continuous, every week, not like every second. And compared to, say, annual consensus or semi-annual consensus, which is what Eden is, or traditional elections. So by doing it continuously, it solves, I think, the biggest problem, which is if you only reach consensus once every 6 months, then you're going to have people campaigning on the future promises. I'm going to elect you to this position. Now, you get in the position, how do we hold you accountable for what you're doing? And if we can't hold you accountable until for another 6 months or a year or 2 years, that's a long time of losses. On the flip side, if we say we're only going to have an election every 6 months, but we're only going to consider the past, now you're asking the individual to do 6 months of speculative work, only to have a community not vote to compensate them for that work, because you can't compensate everyone for their speculative work for 6 months. So continuous consensus is what enables us to have errors on week to week, but average it out to be the right thing, because we can do more course corrections. It allows the individual to get immediate feedback. You're never risking more than 1 week's worth of effort in any particular direction before you get some feedback of whether or not you're going to start earning respect for it, which means it's less risky and there's less trust needed between the community and the people doing the work, or the people doing the work in the community, right? Today, we have to trust the politicians to do what they say they're going to do. We know that doesn't work. But the opposite, individuals aren't going to trust the people, right? Are you going to trust democracy to pay you? No, but by doing it on a more continuous basis, you decrease the amount of trust, you decrease the amount of damage that can be done when the trust is violated, and allow errors to be recovered and averaged out. I think it should be acknowledged that no system is perfectly efficient. If you're talking solar electricity or power transmission or whatnot, just getting energy to your house, there's losses at every step of the way. And so even in this governance process, there's going to be losses. There's going to be funds that are put to wasted work or people that are overpaid. The goal is to minimize the amount of graft relative and waste relative to the amount of productive value. And that waste is a byproduct of getting the productive value, right? When you take lumber to a sawmill, there's sawdust and extra cuttings in order to get the boards out, right? You don't turn 100% of every tree into usable lumber. Likewise, you don't turn 100% of all community processes and compensation into value for the community. But if you don't cut down the tree and you don't put it through the sawmill, you don't get lumber. You want the lumber. And so you have to go through that process, and you don't not produce lumber because there's going to be some percentage of waste from the sawmill. So this consensus process is the sawmill. We're making sawdust, and there are losses along the way. And I think we're trying to invert the relation, the 80-20 process. I think on Steam and Hive, about 20% of the tokens are going to quality work and 80% is going to waste and graft. I'm hoping we can invert it and have 80% going to productive work and 20% going to waste and air. The goal of 100% waste elimination is not a achievable goal, and attempting to achieve it will actually strangle and kill production. Just like if you had a sawmill's goal was to waste no wood, and they try to build saw blades that are super thin, it's not going to work, right? The blades are going to fall apart and so forth. But that's the balance that you have to make. So I hope that answers the question there. Jay?
Thanks, Dan. Another, hopefully it's related to the kind of the converse of my token standards question, and that is that my intuition tells me, Dan, that you're a pioneer also in, you mentioned economic incentives, and I'm envisioning that there may be involved some on-chain DeFi in this new chain that you're developing. And so, and you mentioned that EOS token holders could potentially do like a one-to-one liquidity pool. Would you call that kind of an investment? I mean, I know some friends or family and they've purchased some, my participation is blockchain. I invested in some Ethereum and then I'd like to just see, rather than participate in active work such as the fractally is designed to do, to just make a passive investment and earn some type of rate of return on the tokens themselves. And so I would understand that to be an opportunity.
There's two ways to make passive income. There's staking, long-term, and then there's mutual respect, where you provide liquidity for two tokens. So if they like Bitcoin and the respect token, they can have 50-50 balance and provide liquidity between the two. And then they can get extra yield for providing liquidity between the two. It's a good way to support two projects at the same time and earn some yield while being exposed to both of them going up and down. So those are some of the passive opportunities that's providing value to the network.
How would you go about designing a process that would be implemented for your new chain that would you just create a list of these coins and tokens are available for staking with the fractally, well, it's not fractally, but the new token, and like, Bitcoin, or how would you create a list of these can be staked?
Well, you can't stake other tokens, but you can stake. I guess if there's token bridges, that's one thing. But basically, in the white paper, I outlined liquidity pools with mutual respect, and the community would pick 12 pools with the most community support to receive respect on a Fibonacci distribution, with most of it going to the top 2 or 3. I'd like to address a concept here that's not fully flushed out. Like I need to write a blog post on it to organize my thoughts. But systems tend to centralize naturally. I put a tweet thread out a week or so ago about this. And it has to do with physics and information theory and speed of light. And you'll notice that when it comes to like stock exchanges, everyone co-locates their servers in the same data center as the stock exchange to minimize the latency. And the further out you get, the higher the latency to the stock exchange. And being in the same data center is expensive. Being a consumer way out here is cheap. And so you have this asymmetry of, it's like a city. Being downtown is expensive, being in the suburbs is cheaper, being in the country is cheaper still. It's just not possible for one person to distribute information to all other people with equal cost and equal time, right? So some people you have economic relationships with. For example, let's take the EOS blockchain, for example. Huge amount of data, large amount of bandwidth. Someone wants to connect and download it from you. How much are you going to charge them to download how many hundreds of gigabytes or maybe a terabyte the block log is, and the hundreds of gigabytes of the state? That's a large cost, and it's going to be, there's a economic time, you have to have an economic relationship to cover those costs. You can't just give it all away for free. And you see the same thing with Bitcoin mining pools. There's cost to that infrastructure, such that miners don't want to produce their own blocks because they're the propagation delay from their mining is longer than the propagation delay from mining pool to mining pool, which are all directly connected to each other. And that costs them money, which actually led me to come up with a hypothetical attack on Bitcoin, which is where mining pools, like two mining pools, any two, can say, I'm going to share my blocks with you and you with me, but we're going to delay 1 minute before we share them with the rest of the world, unless we see a block from the rest of the world. End result, those two mining pools have a head start mining on each other's blocks, which means they're more likely to win the next block. And there's no disadvantage to them from everyone else's perspective, because as soon as they see a block from anyone else, they also release their block. So that kind of system would tend to, over time, reward collusion until all the top mining pools are sharing blocks with each other, and everyone else has to wait a minute. And they're never going to be able to have the same economic advantage of those top. There might still be 4 or 5 mining pools, but it's centralized. And it's because of the economics of the distribution and of the speed of light propagation and the cost of the data. So as I forgot where this was going, but the systems technologically tend to centralize with scale, economies of scale, and so forth. So that's why we need governance to manage the centralized system, because on Ethereum you have 2 or 3 mining pools that produce 80% of the blocks. You want to know how decentralized Bitcoin is? Ask how many mining pools produce a block within a 6-hour period, and it's fewer than 21. If you just sample any particular 6-hour period. Ethereum's even worse. And then you say, how many places can you go to get information about the Ethereum blockchain? There's 2 or 3 API service providers, and everyone's connecting to those service providers for that information. So much so that those service providers can censor the blockchain, and they have. And NFTs have disappeared just because those service providers refuse to report the accurate information. So as blockchains scale, you have that natural tendency to centralize. I remember where this is going. So the only way that you prevent that is to have artificial limits that are universally agreed upon. Those limits can be examples, the fractally community size. Why don't we just allow it to go forever? The Bitcoin block size, 1 megabyte limits. It's an artificial limit, but you have to maintain it. And there's no code out there that can enforce that limit. The only thing that enforces it is the difficulty in changing it, difficulty in getting enough people to change their mind on it. But you have to get people to say that these things cannot be changed, because if they change, then things start to spiral down the path of centralization and complete control. And so I look at the trajectory of Bitcoin, and it might take 50 years, but eventually Bitcoin's going the path of gold, where all the gold is in the vaults of central banks. It's really, really expensive to transact on the Bitcoin blockchain directly, and everyone's trading banknotes at a relatively low cost because they're slightly farther from the central source of the logical centralization of the information. So a multi-blockchain world, a multi-currency world, where you limit the size of any one token, you limit the number of users on any particular blockchain, that maximizes the independence of the people. And we need artificial limits that are culturally enforced. And the danger, of course, with anything that's based on culture is after one generation, people forget why you had the limits in the first place. They don't remember the problems when you didn't have the limits. And they say, well, this would be so much more efficient if we just got bigger. And then all of a sudden you're getting bigger. And then that leads to corruption and centralization, and then collapse. And then people are like, oh, let's put limits on how big we allow things to get. Too big to fail, too big to bail. That kind of situation is what we as a society have to keep learning over and over and over again. And so that's why when I look at, that's why I put limits on the size of fractal communities. That's why I put limits on the number of tokens that a particular community can subsidize mutual respect with, to 12, Because if every community enforces the limit of 12, then you can't have a lot of quid pro quo where you have one chain that's subsidizing everyone and everyone's subsidizing that one chain. And then that becomes the new reserve currency and they have undue influence, right? They have dollar status in the community, and that the community with the reserve currency can take advantage of all the other communities that aren't the reserve currency. So I was trying to enforce the artificial limit that there's only so many tokens that one community should subsidize mutual respect for. And if all communities follow that protocol, then you get a nice mesh network of liquidity and you can move between all the different chains without centralization occurring. And the temptation is for some community to defect and say, we're going to subsidize community liquidity with everyone. And then, try to get everyone to build relationships with us, and everyone buys into that policy. And the next thing you know, everyone's lost their sovereignty. One token market cap is bigger than everyone else's. Their inflation is therefore diluting everyone else's inflation disproportionately. And that's the nature of the beast. So that's a long answer to the question you asked about mutual respect and tokens and things like that. But I think there's some very important principles that about the need for artificial limits on scale in all kinds of places in order to prevent centralization of control, and therefore centralization of power, and therefore loss of independence, and therefore slavery. James?
If you'd like to talk, let me know if my dog barking is too distracting. I am glad that this is recorded. Dan, I think if this gets made available, that would be good. Dan just pointed out a lot of really, really fundamental principles about blockchain design that are not obvious. And I just wanted to second everything he said and draw attention to a couple things. So artificial limits turns out are key, which is difficult to stomach if you are an engineer who likes things to be as elegant and minimal as possible. My inclination is to eliminate arbitrary limits and have the most, that this goes back to what I was talking about before with credible neutrality. And there's this tension here that people need to internalize, which is the tension between maximal efficiency, which centralizes, and that's minimal complexity, maximal neutrality. These seem like good things, but the most neutral systems will tend to centralize, as Dan was just describing. So there's this tension here, this line you have to walk where you have to decide what are going to be the arbitrary limits that you put in place. How can you have as few as possible arbitrary boundaries that you set up for yourselves that can dissuade the natural tendency to centralize in a way that does not sacrifice autonomy and decentralization, and it's still credibly neutral. It is still believable that this system is not biasing its outcomes towards a particular group. It still needs to have that understanding of neutrality. So it's actually a really difficult problem. And it also underlines the need for forkability, because communities that have top-down leadership, at some point, it's a matter of time when the leadership does not understand the underlying principles behind why a design is a particular way. And they will rightly point out that we could have a more efficient system if we eliminate some of these artificial boundaries. And when that happens, that community will further centralize. And it is very important, therefore, to have the ability to fork and take a community that still understands the underlying principles and be able to honor the original ideas and keep yourselves autonomous and free from tyranny.
Let me put it a finer point on this. If you've got, if every city has its own police force, they've got redundant HR departments, they've got redundant infrastructure and and all this other stuff. But as soon as two cities combine infrastructure, it actually is cheaper to provide the same amount of police force to both cities under the shared infrastructure. But now you've got fewer people at the top of the pyramid, right? So the efficiency comes from removing redundancy, and independence needs redundancy. So it's always cheaper to remove redundancy, but then you get just-in-time supply chains, which are fragile and they will crash, right? Or there's only one place to buy everything, Amazon. If they blackball you because they don't like your politics, sorry, you don't get to buy anything anymore. But everything's cheaper at Amazon, so let's all just go buy from Amazon. It's not necessarily the case, but that's the benefit. So politicians and people seeking to save a dime for themselves will end up putting people in power that would make them dependent. It actually costs them more in the long run because they're eliminating competition and creating monopolies, but they don't see the second order effects of failing to enforce that. So this gets back to the onboarding thing. These types of principles need to be taught and understood, just like Bitcoin block size, right? In the past, I say, hey, Bitcoin could just increase the block size. EOS, just make the blocks as big as possible, go as fast as possible. But both of those things are not the direction to go if you don't want to have centralized API node providers that end up in de facto control of the network. So understanding those restraints, respecting those, and teaching others to why those exist and why, despite the temptation to save money, despite here's an example. Transaction costs are too high. Let's increase the number of transactions per second to bring down the transaction costs. But by doing so, you make the cost of operating the network, the number of people that can run full nodes, you reduce the redundancy. Now you put the people who run the infrastructure in control. They're in practical control. It's like he who physical possession is 9/10 of the law. It doesn't matter what the community's governance decision is. It's the people that are the only people that can run the nodes veto it. So that's the tension between the independence, the relative power of the members of a community relative to the power of the community, the operators of the community. And if that gets too out of bounds, then the members can't leave because there's no competition, there's no place they can go that can protect them, and then they get sucked in and just becomes a black hole of centralization and ultimate destruction. It might take 50 years to ultimately destroy, but nevertheless, once you go down an unsustainable economic function, it will spiral out of control and then collapse. It's hard to reverse. Mockingbird, this is going to be the final question, and then I'm going to go code. We can't hear you.
You're muted.
Earlier today, the fractally team smiled about its tech. I like using the word nimble, referring to EOS, but I imagine fractally to be much more efficient. That's why I'm here. I believe in nimble blockchain technology. There's a joke that instructors try to teach their young pilots. They start off with, what does IFR stand for? And the joke is, I follow roads. Now,
Is iPhone what?
I follow roads.
Oh,
IFR instead of instrument flight rules. Now, when you look at the development of the United States, the most advanced civilization to have ever existed technologically on a large scale, was built by rails. Because the cities developed by rails, the highways followed the rails. Because that's where the money is. All traffic goes from New York to Chicago, either by rail or by road. That means the planes go there as well. That's not fractal. And to do it in a car, even though the car could be off a road, doesn't make sense, but there's no reason we could not have developed 4x4s in all of our cars if we wish to. So there is inherent sin nature to be lazy or just follow everybody else. But when it comes to aircraft now, and you see pilots and you see co-pilots that don't know how to fly IFR because it's not really needed as much as it should be, because they're just following the lights on the road like the old pilots. You get airliners developing systems throughout the world that just follow essentially what the rails lay down. So even though the new technology is there, it still follows the same centralized system, even though there's no reason that it has to, especially if you have more nimble aircraft. This is a big deal in general aviation, where it can prop up small business, but the airliners are just lobbying against general aviation from growing. It's such a big issue that the United States really only has the only general aviation economy in the world. And it was in danger about maybe a little over a decade ago of that really disappearing. So my hope is that Fractally has the capacity to outmaneuver, be more agile than the rail-based server systems that Google and Amazon really ingrained. And it's a concept because people aren't thinking that if they have a small business in the middle of Kansas, they can access anywhere with an airplane. They're still thinking, I gotta call UPS, I gotta bring it here, and it's gotta go through all this whole network and funneled through Chicago to get to New York. They're not thinking that a small airplane can just take off and take it anywhere. And the few that do are generally forward thinkers anyway. So if this becomes common knowledge, now the energy to change on a large scale becomes a big deal, because you don't have just a lone developer like Dan, Eves, or Vitalik shouldering the load just because they don't have the time to get people up to speed. And anyway, my hope is that Fractally makes enough developers aware that this idea becomes common knowledge, that we do not need to think in straight lines. We can think in spheres.
Yeah,
And there's questions in there if you want to get into it, because I don't know development stuff.
I will point out that road structure is a graph, and graphs are fractal. You have the highways and then smaller roads, and as you get down, it's just it is a fractal pattern. But it is an interesting observation that the airlines follow the railroads, follow the highways. That's more like how a neural net, neurons that wire together. You kind of get these paths that kind of wear, and then cities exist because of something 100 years ago was there. It's no longer relevant.
Right.
There's a city there, and the infrastructure is there, so it exists for its own sake, and it's kind of self-sustaining. But yeah, that's a fascinating observation of human behavior, and you can watch the same kind of things with termite colonies and ant colonies and things.
We have innovation like a computer now. A person in anywhere has access to all the world's libraries, where in the past the New York City Library was a huge advantage, or the Library of Congress was a huge advantage. Now everybody has access to it, so no longer needs to be centralized.
Well, maybe we're physically decentralized, but we're still logically, perhaps we're even more logically centralized. In the past, every city had a library. Now everyone remotely accesses one library, right? Google indexing the entire internet, Amazon providing all the goods. So it seems like we've got access to more information, and it's better in that sense, but we actually have fewer sources of information as a result. And therefore, if that one source censors us, now we're in trouble. So, it's interesting that what liberates us on an informational realm centralizes us on a logical realm.
I believe it's the common, if more people knew it would be harder for Google to centralize all that, and more people would be wanting to decentralize that. And so you mentioned mindset at some point, and I believe that's what fractally will help.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate the extra time and the interest in this discussion. I look forward to meeting with you in further weeks. I think at some point, this community is going to be chock full of people. You guys are doing great work. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And everyone else, of course.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. It takes everyone to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Good to see everyone.
Good to see everyone too.
Yeah,
Take care,
absolutely.
everyone.
Take care.
Saw something about 4-6 hours last time, so I take a chance to jump off right away. Bye bye.
Okay, see you later. Good seeing you.
Enjoy.
Have a good day. Douglas, I'm not sure what you mean by can you start my video. Are you like blocked from having your video on or something like that? Oh, you're muted? Joshua made me the host. So now I have to I'll figure out how to do it. I'm not exactly sure. I guess I go to participants and then I click on your name.
Yeah, I do have the audio, but the video, probably because I wasn't paying attention, and
I just asked you to start video. Did you get that notification?
I got it.
Okay, cool.
Yay!
I brought Douglas to life. He's got a visual now.
Dan has resurrected Osiris.
Nice.
Oh man.
Oh.
Yeah. I also I don't want to sit here and talk for 4 hours. I see Patrick's not here. But Jorge, I thought you had some great ideas. So I did want to sort of take this opportunity to hear more about your pain, to share my sort of struggle through this. I've now taken the viewpoint that it's not best for me to sort of keep sharing these ideas. And I know I did it in the group today a little bit, but I think it's super important that we do consider the discoverability of contributions, because simply saying that this process is imprecise and it only works over time, that's just telling me we don't have a good solution, or we don't have that yet, and that's fine. We're learning. We don't have that solution yet, but I do think it's super important that we're both accepting these ideas that people are doing and sort of testing them out. So my question to you, Jorge, is along your idea that came from not being able to reach consensus or having trouble to digest all the people's contributions and value them. How do you see this sort of evolving so that we could sort of better communicate in these meetings, or even ahead of time to have a more accurate, fair, and quick consensus process?
Well, I was thinking that, well, first of all, at the beginning, I had the whole mechanism not accurately understood. I thought we were grading the contributions from last week. That's what I thought. Now, Dan clarified that we are actually grading the contributions up to this point from all the past. And that makes a big improvement, statistically speaking. One thing is that the thing that got me thinking was actually the Luna fiasco, in which this guy, Duo Kwon, promised the whole planet a product, which was this stable coin that had certain characteristics. And after some time, the community found out that those characteristics weren't up to the level of quality that was required. So if we put it in fractally terms, the way I see it is, yes, eventually people will see the flaws, the protocol will identify these weaknesses, and it will self-correct, which is the same as to see if the whole cryptosphere, the whole crypto world were governed by a fractal process, Well, yes, eventually the whole crypto world found out that Luna was a flawed contribution. It was discarded, but still a lot of people felt the pain from that. So it will be really nice to find ahead of time mechanisms to find these weaknesses. And I was thinking about the probabilities, like how hard is it to find a given weakness, a given flaw in a contribution. For example, in the case of Luna, it was really hard. It was so hard that very few people pointed out to that weakness. So it took several months for the whole planet to find that weakness, and a lot of people had to suffer that pain. So yeah, I'm thinking about that. One thing I was probably considering, one thing that is important is to allow people not to tell what was their contribution, but to actually show it. So it is, I think it is recommendable to incentivize publication of contributions before the breakout sessions, and maybe to demand, to find a way to demand people to study everyone else's contributions, because otherwise the whole level of grading will be as good as the average of the community. And at this moment, the community is pretty high level intellectually, but in the long term, if, for example, we bring 1 billion people, what will be the level of that billion people grading contributions will be lower. But I think Dan has a big point in this statistically averaging. I mean, averaging statistically is good. In the long term, it works, but it doesn't protect you from big deviations. If you throw a coin for 100 times, in average, you will have 50 times each side of the coin, but that doesn't prevent you from having 10 crosses in one row, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I've been thinking about this, and frankly, after talking with Dan, I don't see it as a flaw as before I asked my questions, but I'm still pondering. Sorry for the big
I appreciate that. And I think that, you brought up a very big point about Luna. It's something that's affected the entire crypto community. Even if you weren't invested in it, it's, it ripples, it's a huge effect. And my sort of repeated concern, and the reason I've dropped back and now receiving echoes of what I've put out, not necessarily, you didn't necessarily hear what I put out and are echoing that, but you share the same concern. So I do want to sort of bring it out and use this opportunity to share my solutions to these concerns as well, because I believe that there are some solutions. So yeah, back to Luna, like, you brought up the point that there was not people that were really critical, or people that were standing up at the beginning and saying, hey, there's something wrong here. And I think that that's what I'm doing. I've tried in previous weeks, I tried for maybe 8 or 9 weeks, really hard to share these concerns and to offer solutions for them, which were not, they were not really thoroughly examined, nor were they received, because I believe that this isn't viewed as a problem. Dan says in every meeting, like, things are going fine, and that just shows to me that he's not up to date on the concerns. So back to sort of my solutions is it goes to the contributor. It also goes to the discoverability. It goes to the knowledgeability, right? So number one is, before I say this, I want to say, like, Fractally team says they're working on this, so hopefully we will have something from them. But what I've previously suggested is some sort of format that we can share a contribution. Making a simple markdown template makes the most sense. A markdown template would be something the team could create within less than an hour and share. And then every person would be suggested to take this template to share their contributions. Not only that, you would be encouraged to post ahead of time onto your Hive blog. That way other people could sort of discover this. What we really need is a centralized solution to collect all these sort of articles and put them together. Now, the counterpoint of this is it requires more work. If you say, okay, you have to make an article, then you're making people do this work, which may not be easy for them. But if you say this is an option, then you get to test these things out. So your contributions, what you've actually done, they're pretty easy to say, like, oh, this is what I've done, because you can deliver it and show a picture of it or whatever. But there's also this idea of your contributions, which you promise. And as far as that goes, a mechanism I've developed is to have two values. You have deliverables, which are one field, and then you have a value of 1 to 100 that you rate yourself on how well you delivered that. So you self-rate yourself. And then also other Fractally members can say, okay, this person did or did not do this contribution that they said they did in the future, and then have the ability to change that. So you have this sort of accountability that keeps moving, where you can look at and say, okay, I've said I'm going to do this. It's a major contribution because I published it. Now the community is thinking I'm only doing 60% of what I said I was going to do. So now, I have a sort of mechanism to do more. So that's one solution. It might not be the best. I just want to throw it out there. As far as discoverability is concerned, that is absolutely critical in my mind. And my voting systems that I developed, you require the person who is a candidate to publish in a specific format what information is relevant to the election. So you could have a specific format about, you have so many characters to talk about what your thing is. You can have a video or whatever. And again, it might be too complicated. It might not work for this system, but this is a solution. And then once you have this piece of data, you can track who is sort of logged in and downloading this data. You can't really prove that you actually read everything, but you can prove that an account has received this information by, you could do it with a Hive comment. You could do it in a Web 2.0 context where people just log in, and then if they open up a certain part of the stage or part of the application, then they are marked on their profile that they are aware. So this allows us to track awareness of Fractally members, of other Fractally members. And I truly believe that once we're more aware, we open up a whole new door of opportunities. Because the other aspect of discoverability is who we are. And I think that one thing that we're lacking side of our sort of Eden profiles is we can't show our value and declare how we want to connect with others, as well as what we want to get from Fractally, because it's super important whenever you're finding employees for your organization, you're finding people to work with, that they care, they have something that they want that they can only get from you. And once we're clear about what we want, we can sort of start to work with other members within Fractally to get towards these goals together. So yeah, that's my follow-up. And I just wanted to rant there, so thank you. And I do thank you for your dedication to these ideas.
Hey, before you go, are you leaving right now, or are you waiting for dancing?
You're muted right now, Doug.
Oh, I'm sorry. I probably am going to leave in a few minutes because I have company over and it's a beautiful day and we're going to go enjoy. But yeah, I wanted to pop in and say hi. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, just before you go, and I just noticed that if we are about to form several independent Fractally communities, then there is a competition open for the one of those communities that discovers contributions faster and more efficiently. So you really have we do really have a great point here. it is not enough to trust the statistical nature of the system. There is a open race for the best, most efficient ways to discover contributions. And that's great, I think.
Yeah, that's really cool. And feel free if you want to respond to that, Doug, before you go. But if not, I was going to add to a couple of thoughts that you guys inspired me to share. And yeah, thanks for all the thoughts. And I'll just share these quickly. But yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying. And it's good to think about a couple of things that I think are helpful to add on. One, it's going to be really nice when like there's a UI that I think the faculty team is building that can show all of this all in one spot. Like one thing I like is something that Felix has done in the meetings. Felix is here. He's done in the meetings I've been with him, where he goes into like the spreadsheets that Gregor and Joshua share and show like the total amount of respect and rank of people so far, which is helpful if you have that in addition to the like a profile where you can like display it nicely. Then that would be cool to make it easy for everybody. And then another thing too, Jorge mentioned like showing your work, and something that I think is really helpful for the community, something that I've been doing and not really many other people have been doing, maybe a couple people have been doing here and there. Some people, like for example, Gabriel was in my room, he wanted to share his screen, but Zoom didn't let him share his screen. So some people are being limited by that, but I think sharing your video or sharing something on your screen is like super helpful. And I'm imagining like a world where like everybody at these fractally, or not everybody, because not everybody will do it, but if lots of people are sharing their content on the screen and sharing presentations, like I do it with I have a green screen behind me, and so I bring up websites and I share like these websites that I'm working on, and then I flip through it and explain like different things that I'm building, and I just go through and show it so like people can see it, so people can see it live. And it also makes it like we're in a video medium, so every time that I do this, like it's being recorded so I can share it as content and so forth, and also helps people understand what I'm doing. I'm planning to make some like tutorials like to show how I do this, and also people can just do it with just like having a whiteboard or a blackboard or something like that to some extent, or a piece of paper or something like that. But I think that that's like a very helpful way that the community can grow. And like imagine if like say Jorge mentioned, like if we have billions of people, or even if we have like thousands or millions, or even now, like if a lot of people are making like presentations every week to show their work, and especially if like people are really valuing respect and so forth, then like I think that would catch on, like grow really quick, both in terms of fractally and then also just in terms of like an amazing amount of content. Like Felix also makes videos, and we've talked about how the fractally process lends itself to like video creators, because you're meeting with people and you're making videos every week, or you can be, at least you're doing videos. So I think there's a lot of potential there to help both grow fractally and then also just share your work better to make the process more accurate in terms of being able to judge contributions and so forth.
Great. Please teach us how you do that.
Yeah, that's
Sure,
exciting,
happy to.
man. And yeah, I mean, like, I guess somehow I'm still looking for a little bit more guidance. And yeah, it is sort of a race to figure out how we do this. But my only concern is that the people who are running are not passing the baton. And they're not passing the baton because the hand is not outstretched behind the person in front. So all I want is that we have our ideas honored and our contributions honored, and they don't just float in the wind, you know? So yeah, I look forward to not being so critical, and also like trusting in the fractally team and hoping that they do create a solution. I wish that we were more a part of that, but like I just don't have enough time to worry about these things now. Like I'm about to cut off and go enjoy the day and freestyle rap to strangers, you know? So it's like a completely different thing and a completely different vibration as far as like me trying to help and not being received, as opposed to like how I live my normal life. And I think that whenever fractally sort of becomes more human and learns to recognize our social motivations are for showing up, we can better sort of honor each other and honor ourselves along this process. So yeah, thank you all, and I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody's ideas and everybody working forward, and I'm gonna drop. Peace.
Hey Douglas, one last thing.
Doug, great
Thank
seeing
you.
you.
Douglas, I had one of my new guys that joined really liked what you were saying. He had the same critiques on the process. And I just got his feedback like, hey, I haven't seen many meetings. And he was like, hey, I like that guy. He's standing up for it. So I just want to encourage you that, sometimes you think you're in an echo chamber that people aren't hearing or listening. People are. So
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. All right. Peace, guys.
All right, see you, Douglas. Have a great day. Enjoy the wraps and the sun.
Okay, I will. Thanks.
all right, guys, I'm going to leave too.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good day.
I'll leave it to you guys.
Great
Bye-bye.
seeing you and great seeing you, Jorge.
Congratulations for everyone.
Yeah, congratulations and thanks for sharing all your thoughts today. It was a great conversation today.
Great.
Hey Dan, I was about to hop off for a little bit too, but I sent you a message on Discord.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just
If
saw
you
that.
wanted to meet a little bit later, and then we can. Yeah, I don't know what your plans are. Maybe just we have a little breather in between this long little session with Fractally, and then we can meet up and discuss more about kind of plans moving forward with what we've discussed throughout the week already.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Yeah, it sounds good to go outside for a bit too and have some time outside. And I think those times are good. We're still recording, so I won't get into too much detail here right now. But I suppose I'll end the recording, and then that sounds good with the time. Are there any last words you want to say before I end the recording, Felix?
I was gonna jump in on some of the things that they were saying as far as, but I mean, I think I'm excited about what we're doing with the moving forward, moving Eden forward. This last Wednesday, that meeting was pretty exciting, and we are starting our own fractal. And one of the things that I think, Douglas has a lot of ideas and he presents a lot of ideas, but I think we have to, he's not the only one. There's other people, like right from the beginning of Fractally, people were like ready to like, we need to change this and this, and Dan's put a lot of thought behind all of this, and so then it's just like, and he's leading this initiative, right? And so it's good to have several fractals. If we have different ideas, it's good to apply them within like how you would utilize it, and then that's a great test, like a trial, right? And like what we're going to be doing with Eden, like we can, it's a group of us and we're applying the Fractally method, but we might tweak some things here and there, and we're going to also be able to provide feedback back to the Genesis fractal of like what we're seeing over there. And I think you and I we've discussed talking about forming a team for Fractally, and I think it probably should be something correlated with what we've got going over there, since we're going to be doing these weekly Discord town hall events with Eden, and then we're active every single week over here on Fractally. And so that's kind of how I've been now presenting like what I'm contributing week to week within Fractally. It's more on the Eden side, but I mean there's going to be a part where it becomes synonymous almost, because like we're applying Fractally concepts onto Eden, as well as engaging the Eden community and getting that more going, because that's what we've learned here with Fractally. Is showing up every single week has really strengthened our community and interactions and relationships. And so it's exciting. I think we just got to innovate. That's what we are. We're at the cutting edge of this technology, and that's what excites us. That's what excites me. That's why I'm passionate about this industry, is because I want to be on the cutting edge. Like that's what's just the most exciting thing that makes you feel like can really have some big impact on the world. And this space it's prime and hot and it's ready to go. It's a matter of time. So
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Very well said, Felix. And I agree with, I think, everything that you're saying, and like very much agree. And like, it's super exciting. And also the stuff that you started saying, like about, critiques that Douglas has and others, like I agree. Like I appreciate constructive criticism, and Douglas does a lot of great work, like really helpful work, super inspiring, and many other people in the community also do with constructive criticism, and that can really help. but also like I feel like the process has proven itself that it works like really well already, and like anything that can be improved, like that's, I don't know, like a cherry on top, as they say, or something like that. Like it could make it better, but like already it's just it's been amazing, like bringing the community together every week, like you said here, and seeing so many people do great work, and like now doing with the Eden, I think it's super exciting, and I'm glad that you're really excited about that too. And yeah, I think like when people want to make improvements and changes, like it's cool to suggest it here, but then I think that a big part of it will just come from like iterating and making new fractals and like different, you know, communities and so forth. If somebody wants to try it a different way and they can rally a community around it, and then they do it and that turns out to work well, then the other communities can learn from it and vice versa, and that makes everybody better. But yeah, there's so much there. I don't want to ramble too much, but yeah, it's super exciting, and I agree with what you're saying. And I'm excited about the team. I'm excited about the Eden. I'm excited about everything we're doing in Fractally, and yeah, it's just like incredibly exciting. And also, you mentioned about like, I think you mentioned about like being on the cutting edge and like benefiting the world and stuff. And I feel like we're really in a position, and we're working on something that can be super helpful for everybody, profoundly helpful. Dan made a lot of great points about that as well today, and it was a great conversation overall.
Yeah. And the teams is really interesting too. Like this is the next, like, you know, it took me a little bit to really understand, I guess, the point of the teams and how it incorporates with everything. But I like that teams are limited to 12, because these teams then become very more self-efficient, because then it's everyone in that small group of 12 people holding each other accountable with like the main, the team needs to have like a main objective that everyone, you know, can kind of stand around. That's why, like, for me, it's like I'm thinking like, you know, you and I, we're going to be delivering on a content front. So like our team probably needs to be more content, you know, specific people in the team, so that like collectively our goal is like everyone can contribute in a way, but we're all measuring each other on the same goal. Cause like, and then that's where I think, you know, the teams represent within the main fractal of like, I guess it's overall contribution to the entire, or the bigger, larger fractal of spreading like fractal governance, really.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Teams are interesting and fascinating, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface. You know, we've just talked about it, and we've talked about it a lot, and it's exciting. But we haven't actually started it yet, and like it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens when like I think there's only 3 teams right now, or 4 teams. When like we get this team going, and I don't know, maybe we'll start like team meetings, and we'll have awesome team members, I think, and I hope, I'm looking forward to it, and like seeing what everybody does and like the interactions that spread out of that, and then seeing if there's like, you know, dozens or hundreds or thousands of teams or whatever all helping with Fractally. It's super inspiring and exciting. It's been, oh man, I could go on and on, but yeah, and I'll just say really quick, that's something that I was in the room with Dan Larimer again today, and he was talking about how like, it's really difficult to pick, you know, it's really difficult to rank people's contributions between 1 and 6, because everybody's doing amazing work. And like one of the points that I made was like it could get even more intense as like there's more people and teams working together and people get more organized. So I don't know, that's kind of a whole nother topic. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but yeah, there's just so much exciting stuff going on, and yeah, I'm super excited about it, and I'm also glad to hear your voice with it too, Felix, because you're sharing like so much great work and sharing so many great ideas, and I'm looking forward to working with you on all this stuff.
Yeah, same. Appreciate it. Yeah. Well, yeah, we could probably go on for a while, but you know, this is good because I think, you know, I really like what we got in the making with this weekly Eden event that we're going to be hosting, because yeah, we can do a lot of good. Both with what we've got our hands in, I'm excited for sure. So yeah, we'll talk offline, but yeah, pumped for sure, 100%.
Cool, that's good. I'm pumped for sure, 100% too. I noticed that Corey's here. I'm assuming that he's not here, but maybe he's still listening. I don't know. Would you like to say any last words, Corey, before I end the recording, or summarizing thoughts? Seems like he's not here. Okay, cool. So I guess I'll wrap it up there. Sounds good, Felix?
Yep, that sounds good. Yeah, yeah, just hit me up on Discord what works for you, and then we'll set up a time and we'll meet then.
Okay, cool. Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Felix, for all the great thoughts. Thanks, Gore, for the great work too, even though you're probably not here. And yeah, thanks everybody for listening or watching once this is out there. And yeah, this has been like an amazing meeting. So yep, thanks so much everybody, and goodbye. Have a great day. And
Yep,
and
take care.
everybody.